founding fathers definitely knew what they were doing when they said, shall not be infringed. Forget all the misinformation, because this is The Blunt Object, presented by Second Call Defense. Defending you after you defend yourself. This is Lock and Load with Bill Frady.
Well, it's not really Bill Frady. There's three of us to fill in. So you're listening to Bill Frady's Lock and Load Radio, but this is Amanda Suffecool, and we've got John Edeen and Rob Morse that are here with us. And John, you've got some to tell us about some silencers.
Right. Well, we know that the Hearing Protection Act of 2017 is now in front of the legislature on a national level, and it's an act that's designed to take suppressors or silencers or gun mufflers, whatever you want to call them, off the National Firearms Act restricted list and actually treat them like a regular firearm. And at Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, we've written a white paper or a position paper, and it's authored by 4 ear, nose, and throat surgeons, Matthew Branch, Gerard Gianoli, Bradford Ress, and the founder of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, Dr. Timothy Wheeler, who is a head and neck surgeon. He's an ear, nose, and throat doctor. And basically, the problem is this, is that noise-induced hearing loss is a real public health issue, unlike guns are a public health issue. Okay, this is the real thing. There is a causal relationship between loud noise exposure and irreversible hearing loss. And this has been long recognized by the medical community and the United States government. Noise-induced hearing loss is permanent and untreatable, and prevention is the only possible intervention. Now, noise-induced hearing loss is the most prevalent service-connected disability among veterans. They're around firearms, they're around loud engine noises like aircraft, and they get hearing loss. And per the CDC, 15% of adults age 18 and over, or nearly 38 million Americans, have hearing problems. Over 100 million Americans who own guns are at risk for gunshot-induced, noise-induced hearing loss, and auditory injuries are sustained by bystanders the same as shooters. Nearly all gunshots exceed the noise threshold for instant damage to the hearing cells of the inner ear, and their explosive gun blast generates 1,000 times the force on the eardrum than the noise itself. So the benefit of suppressors, muzzle blast sound levels from most firearms range from 140 to over 170 decibels. 120 decibels is considered the maximum safe level for short exposures. The intensity of a car horn 3 feet away is an equivalent of 120 decibels. Earplugs and or earmuffs only reduce noise by 20 to 30 decibels. And evidence supporting the need for greater use of firearm suppressors comes from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the National Institute on Deafness and Other Communicative Disorders, the Center for Disease Control, as well as academic and military research. Muzzle-mounted suppressors are vastly superior to ear protectors, providing 50% greater noise reduction, and only suppressors can make most modern firearms safe for hearing, as noise at gun ranges routinely reaches 160 decibels.
Wow. Yeah, we've all been there.
Yep. Conventional ear protectors deafen the wearer to external sounds. Suppressors facilitate clear verbal communication between shooters and increase safety. Now, restricting suppressors is a long-standing obstacle to hearing safety, and listing suppressors in the 1934 National Firearms Act for no apparent reason made them extremely expensive and difficult to acquire here. They are readily available to gun owners in much of Europe and in New Zealand, where firearms are more strictly regulated. So you can walk into a hardware store and buy a suppressor in England, but you can't get the gun. That's the difference. And also, there's this argument about suppressors promoting crime. Well, suppressed gunfire is still very loud. It's still about 120 decibels. And there's no evidence that commercial suppressors increase the danger of criminal shootings. Single-use suppressors can be easily made at home, And criminals want easily concealed weapons, and a suppressor probably doubles the length of a firearm, so it makes it very hard to conceal. Illegal suppressor use is extraordinarily rare and is prosecuted at a rate of only 0.02%. So, Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership strongly supports making firearm suppressors readily available as a critical public health step to prevent hearing loss. Lowering barriers to suppressor ownership will decrease gunshot-induced hearing damage in over 100 million American firearm owners, and with no material impact on criminal use. So that's where we're starting. Okay, this paper has actually got a lot of evidence-based information. There's actually some photomicrographs of the hearing cells and of the actual auditory nerve damage that happens. And it's worthwhile looking at. And you can find this on DRGO.us, and it's worth the read. I really think that it makes a valid argument to support this legislation to get the suppressors off of the National Firearms Act and get it back into basically being treated as a firearm.
John, have other radio stations called you or someone at DRGO up and asked you about this paper? Because you guys are really saying that, look, legislators are hiding behind the myth of the dangerous gun so that, each year, millions of people, particularly the older Americans, suffer hearing loss.
Well, we all suffer hearing loss. You don't have to be old. You could be young. It's a single exposure of greater than 120 decibels, you get permanent hearing loss. It damages the little hair cells in the inner ear so badly that they're irreparable. Mild damage, actually, the hearing can actually repair, but the severe damage that you get with these single exposures, and then there's also cumulative damage of lower exposures as well. So if you're getting 120 decibels over and over and over and over again, you may end up with hearing loss there as well. So in answer to your question, no, I haven't talked to anybody. This is the first time we're talking about this on the air, at least from my standpoint. And I think it's something that needs to be put out there and that people need to understand that there is scientific basis behind this. We're all, the Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, we're scientists, and we believe in evidence-based medicine. And, this white paper provides the evidence base, and there's a list of, I don't know how many. Let me see, look at the back of the paper, but there's probably 20 references, actually 17 references in the back citing scientific literature. So this is a real scientific document. It's a real scientific research, unlike the faux research we get from Bloomberg School of Public Health.
Hey, John.
Yes.
One of the things you said was that typical hearing protection that all of us have been trained to use knocks the noise down, what'd you say, 20, 30 decibels? 20
to 30 decibels. But still, if you're shooting a 160 decibel gun, that only gets you to 130, and that's above the safe threshold. And even double plugging often is not adequate because you're dealing with the blast wave as well as the overpressure from the gun going off. How many of us have stood next to somebody shooting a 357 or a 44 Magnum and felt that blast hit you in the side of the face? This is what we're talking about. That causes hearing damage as well as the actual noise of the firearm going off. And so the suppressor will actually dissipate that blast wave and reduce the sound level. Whereas if you're just wearing earmuffs or earplugs or both, you still get the blast, but it'll decrease the actual sound decibels, but it doesn't decrease the blast decibels.
John, we have about 15 seconds before we're out. I want us to talk about this when we come back. This is important to every listener of Bill Frady's Lock and Load Radio. We'll be back right after this.
Okay, and we're back. You're listening to Bill Frady's Lock and Load Radio, but Bill's not with us. So it's Rob, Don, and I who are talking. And right now we're going back to continue the conversation about silencers. And something that John just said really resonates with me, is the NRR rating when you are out shopping for hearing protection. They don't tell you, what it protects. They just give you this number that says it's an NRR number. Really, what that means is noise reduction rating. So you have to know how noisy your gun is to begin with to know what the NRR is going to do for you. John, you want to speak on that just a little bit?
Sure. And we talked about the decibel levels, and that, often firearms and ranges have a decibel level of about 160. And that safe hearing is, less than 120 or less. Now, if you want to look at the numbers, a lawnmower is about 90 decibels. A jackhammer is 110 decibels. A firecracker is 145 decibels. So that's outside the safe level. And then a 9mm pistol is 171 decibels, and a .308 rifle is 181 decibels.
Wow, that's not close.
No, that's not even close. So if you have an NRR of, say, 29 on your hearing protection, and you're firing a .308 rifle, you're still going to be in a pretty much a damaging range. And so you have to be aware that even double plugging, as we said before, with, say, soft plugs in the ear canals and then the muffs over the top, you don't attenuate the blast wave. And so you still are at risk for hearing loss and hearing damage that is irretrievable. It's permanent. There is no treatment because it's actually neural hearing loss. It's actually the little nerve cells that vibrate. And I don't know if you know how your hearing works. And I think it's worth, just talking about that for a second. So you have your ear canal. Inside your ear canal is the eardrum, right? There are three little bones inside the ear. It's the malleus, the incus, and the stapes. And the stapes is, or otherwise known as the hammer, anvil, and stirrup. Right. Now, the stirrup is attached to a window to the cochlea. And the cochlea is a snail-shaped organ that has fluid in it. So when you have a noise, it hits the eardrum, causes these bones to vibrate. That vibration is translated into a fluid wave in the ear. And if you get a violent fluid wave, then that vibration actually can damage the cells. Now, here's an interesting thing. There's a muscle called the stapedius muscle, which is a little muscle that is attached to the stapes. And when you anticipate a loud noise, like if you know if you're going to shoot a gun, that muscle contracts, and it actually helps to, it helps to dampen that vibration. And so a lot of people, when they, if you're in a shooting, if you're in a defensive shooting, you get auditory exclusion. That's how you get auditory exclusion. That muscle clamps down.
It's not just that I'm so focused on what's happening that I'm ignoring the noise. It's that muscle in my inner ear has locked up and tried to freeze these bones, so literally I won't hear it.
Exactly.
Crazy.
And the thing is, the person standing next to you, no protection.
Didn't expect it. Yeah.
No protection. And they're the ones that get damage. They're the ones that get the permanent hearing loss, because your brain is saying, okay, here comes the trigger press, boom. The stapedius muscle clamps down. So this is why, the hearing protection is so important, and that trying to decrease that blast wave and the actual noise will help prevent hearing loss. And there's, think about all the millions of people who use hearing aids and who get disability from hearing loss. All that money can be saved. So it's probably billions of dollars.
John, I've got a little bit take on it. I'm not. Everything you say is absolutely true. I don't question it a minute, but I'm thinking how much safer it is on the range if the students can hear me. How much safer it is for them. There's a psychological issue. Students hate to yell at an instructor, but they have to on the range. We're all walking around with our heads padded with these earmuffs. So it's much safer if they can hear and ask a question. perhaps most importantly, any of them then can hear if someone issues a stop command. So
absolutely, it's a safety issue.
It's a communications issue as well. And look, if there was no possible way that we could make guns manageable, okay, I understand that. We have to live with the noise. But there is. In fact, as you pointed out, it's considered good manners to shoot and hunt outdoors with a silencer in many countries. You're considered part of a sort of a barbarian if you don't use one. And yet here we've made it illegal.
Right. And also, it actually helps you shoot better. There's less recoil. And, you can get your shots off more quickly because it attenuates that blast. And, it makes you a better shooter on top of making you a more quiet shooter.
What's the name of the bill again, John?
The bill is the Hearing Protection Act of 2017. It's H.R. 367, and the companion bill is S59.
Where would our listeners, who do they have to tell? How do they make this magic happen? Because this is important.
Well, I think you need to talk to your representatives, both on the Senate and the House side. I think this is one of the priority legislations, from the Second Amendment people. This legislation and also the concealed carry reciprocity. This is something that I think we can actually make happen, and it's going to make people's lives better. You're going to prevent hearing loss. I do Appleseed. That's one of the things I like to do for fun. And I can't tell you the number of times when I'm down in the prone and I put my cheek on the stock and it dislodges my hearing protection. And then when you shoot, even a .22 can cause permanent hearing loss. You do it with a 5.56, it's even worse. If you do it with a 308 or a 30-06, now you're really causing some damage. So I think it's really important that we understand that if we can get the suppressors on these firearms, it's going to prevent people from having hearing damage in the long term. I'm already, half deaf from listening to loud rock and roll music in the 70s, so I don't need any more hearing loss. And I have drills in the OR, which is the other thing, you get noise from your occupation a lot of times.
I can tell you that. They've told me that the noise of riding a motorcycle is something, and so wearing hearing protection in addition to head protection. But when we come back, we're going to talk about security in hospitals. You're listening to Bill Frady's Lock and Load Radio. But and then John is going to tell us more about security in the hospital.
Welcome back to Bill Frady's Lock and Load Radio. This is our last half hour together on a Friday at the end of the week. Bill's busy moving his house. This is Rob Morse. I'm joined by John Edeen and Amanda Suffecool. Dr. Edeen, you're part of Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership. You live in what is sometimes described as a impermissive environment, meaning a lot of hospitals are gun-free zones. They're also a target for violence, for terrorism. John, you've written about that. Please tell our listeners.
Okay, well, I wrote an article about the terrorist attack against the largest hospital in Kabul, Afghanistan. This occurred at 9 o'clock in the morning on March 8, 2017. And according to reports, what happened was anywhere from 3 to 4 men dressed in medical clothes, like white coats and stuff, approached the back gate of the hospital. One of them exploded a bomb vest, and this allowed them access into the hospital. They swiftly moved into the hospital, going up to the upper floors, second and third floors, where they proceeded to use a combination of hand grenades, knives, and firearms to start massacring the people in the hospital. We also found out later on that 2 of the interns that were working at the hospital were also involved, and that they both had bomb vests and they had firearms. And so what they did was they systematically went from ward to ward. They would throw a hand grenade in, and then they would go and either stab or shoot the wounded. And they were not just spraying, but they were doing headshots. Okay, so this was planned out in advance.
Murder.
It's murder, and it's inside help. Now, if you look at the reports, the ISIS claimed credit. However, the Taliban ward was not touched. That was on the first floor. And so that makes it dubious that this was an ISIS attack. But it really makes us start to wonder, what's going on? Why is this happening? And it's interesting because there's been a lot of attacks against medical facilities in Afghanistan since 2015. The International Red Cross reported 240 attacks that either killed or injured medical personnel and closed, damaged, or destroyed medical facilities in Afghanistan. And the UN also documented 119 incidents where healthcare facilities were targeted in 2016 alone. And this was not even the first time this hospital was attacked. There was actually a Taliban suicide bomber in 2011 that detonated his vest and killed 6 people and wounded 26 others. And the interesting thing about this attack was that it started at 9 o'clock in the morning. Guess what time it ended? Take a guess.
4 in the afternoon, 5 in the afternoon?
4 in the afternoon. They were in there for 7 hours. Okay. Some of the people managed to get out of the rooms onto the ledges. One person actually jumped out of a second-story window. But, our people tell us, okay, run, hide, fight. Well, when you're in a hospital bed, there's no running, there's no hiding, and there's no fighting. So all these poor people were basically sitting ducks. And, so we have to ask ourselves, what about here? What's going on here? Again, we talked about that hospitals are gun-free zones and that they're soft targets. And the terrorists know that. And this is part of the planning. These guys are using this as training. They're using lessons learned, and sooner or later, this is coming to a hospital near you. When? Who knows? Look at hospital security. Most hospital security people aren't armed. They have a taser. They may have pepper spray.
They have a radio.
Yeah, they have a radio. And so, it's kind of like that TV commercial. I'm not a security guard. I'm here to report, crime. I report a robbery, but I don't do anything about it. And hospitals are so big nowadays that even if there's an attack happening in one part of the hospital and there's a police officer who is armed in another part of the hospital, it may take him 10 minutes to get to where the thing is, if he can even find it. And that's the other problem. Plus, police officers and uniformed security are easily identifiable. And so if you're a terrorist and you've done your planning, the first thing you're going to do is find the guy in uniform, and you're going to either shoot him or disarm him. And then you're going to make an example out of him, like they did in Budanovsk in Russia. And when the Chechen rebels took over that hospital in 1995, they took all the uniformed officers and they lined them up in front of all the hostages, and they said, basically, you will cooperate or this will happen to you. And they just summarily executed all the people in uniform. Okay, so that all those authority figures are now gone. And so this is the playbook. This is the playbook that they're going to be running from. The other thing is, it's not surprising that there are inside people. Okay, almost every attack happens from an insider, inside intelligence, inside access. These 2 interns had, if you look at most hospitals, they have ID cards that allow you to gain access to locked doors. Well, these 2 guys had access to the whole hospital. All they had to do was slide their card and open the ward, and off you go. And so we have to be careful about the people that are in our hospitals. We need to screen them. But even then, screening is retrospective. It's not prospective. And so people can be changed. They can be radicalized. And, so that's another issue that we really have to worry about.
John, you gave me a number. I'm not sure if it was from you or someone else in your organization. You told me, and I'd like you to verify this if I've got it wrong. What is it? 10% of workplace violence occurs in a medical facility?
Right, especially in emergency rooms. It's a very dangerous place because people, first of all, aren't always in their right mind. You got a lot of drug abuse. You have a lot of people who have mental disorders, and they can be physically violent, and they're difficult to restrain. Then you have family members who are under stress. And so, you know, a wife comes in and she has a mishap with a pregnancy and she dies.
Wow.
You know, that husband, the father of the child who didn't make it and the wife who didn't make it, now is totally distressed. The shooting that happened in the hospital in Boston a few years ago, where the guy came in looking for the heart surgeon who took care of his mother and that she died. Well, he went in there and shot the surgeon and then shot himself. So this is the kind of stuff that happens. And plus, you know, going to and from hospitals, we work late night shifts. We have the, 3 to 11 shift. So now you're a nurse. You've just finished your shift. Now you have to go to the remote parking lot or the parking garage where it's dark and there's not very many people around.
John, how many people of your patients that you release leave the hospital with a bag full of pain medications?
Yeah, most of them leave with scripts, but sometimes they do have medications. But still, I mean, it's leaving the hospital at odd hours. I mean, I come and go to the hospital late at night. It's dark. You're parking in a parking garage. There's nobody around because it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you got to come in and take care of something that's emergent. And so, and that's why I'm here right now talking to you guys on the radio, because of that very issue. I can carry right up until the point I walk into that hospital, and now I'm disarmed, and now, I can be victimized.
How do we help you fix this?
Well, I think that we actually have to do it state by state. It's because it's local laws. In the state of Texas, we have our 30-06 and 30-07 signs. We need to get rid of gun-free zones. That has to be done through the legislatures. And so we have to, again, all of us need to communicate with our elected representatives saying we need this to get fixed.
Not now. When we come back, We'll fix it. On a Friday, welcome to the last segment of Bill Frady's Lock and Load Radio. I'm Rob Morse. I'm joined by John Edeen, Dr. John Edeen, and Amanda Suffecool. John, you had a few more points you wanted to make about hospitals. What can they do? Is this something we can't avoid? Is terrorism just a fact of life and we have to live with it?
Well, it is a fact of life, and it's coming here. When, I don't know. Where, I don't know, but it's coming. And the real issue is hospitals are not prepared for this kind of a thing. Hospitals do casualty drills, they do mass casualty drills, but they don't do, we're the mass casualty drill. They're not prepared to be the target. And so we have to look at what can we do to be prepared and also to deter the attack, and to make it known that if you come here, this is not a soft target, this is a hardened target. And the kind of things that I've been talking about over the last several years is arming hospital staff, doctors, nurses, technicians, and maybe even doing something like the FASTER program, where we train in both firearms and also trauma medicine and first aid. Because if this does happen, the only people who have a chance of intervening are the ones that are there on the scene at the time. We talked about how the security people aren't going to be able to get there and that people can't get away. So wouldn't it be better to have an armed staff member standing behind some cover at the door waiting for the bad guys to come through?
Well, we're not asking the hospital staff to learn to be soldiers. these are staff who are armed everywhere else they go. We're just asking them to bring the gun they carry all the time with them when they go to work.
Absolutely. And and just like concealed carry anywhere else, when whatever the event happens, only the people who are prepared and are armed are going to be able to stop what's going on. And so this is something that we actually need to talk about with our hospitals. The problem is that we're dealing with big corporations. And unfortunately, it's probably going to take an attack against a hospital with a lot of casualties before the hospital administrators and their lawyers are going to change their mind about doing this. Because it's the corporate mindset is entrenched, and it's very difficult to change policies, especially in large corporations that cover multiple states.
John,
Yes.
I think that one of the things that you run into is not only the big corporations, but the fact that the other people who you're talking to all went into that career because they're nurturers. Their job is to save people and to save lives and to make people better. And so to some, just the concept of a gun is so foreign to them because they've bought into the message that, guns bring harm and they bring safety. I mean, it's the same struggle that schools run into.
Absolutely. And, but then you look at our nurturers, but aren't our nurturers also protectors? Okay? The mama bear, the sheepdog, you can use any analogy you want. But, the last thing I want to see is my colleagues or my patient who I just spent 4 hours fixing be slaughtered by a terrorist or some maniac. Okay? And this is where I'm coming from. And this is how we have to couch the argument to those people. Now, it's very difficult for the people who, the rainbows and sunshine people that we talked about in the first hour. Okay, you're never going to get through to them. But people who have a little bit of logic between their ears, I think we can actually reach those people and get them to understand that, it's not the tool that's the problem. It's the bad guy that's the problem. And whether it's a terrorist or a psychopath or, a violent criminal actor, unless we're prepared when the attack or the violent action occurs, we're all sitting ducks. We're all going to be victims.
John, I so agree with you. So tell us, how, if as the listeners are listening to this, how can they hear more about what John Edeen has to say? How can they find you and find the messages that you're putting forth?
Okay. Well, yeah, you can find me at Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, DRGO.us. The article we talked about, the hospital terrorist attack in Kabul, is in there. I've written an article that appeared in USCCA's Concealed Carry magazine last summer about the history of hospital terrorism and talking about some of these issues. That is also reprinted on DRGO.us. And also, there's another article I wrote. It's called The Unthinkable, an Active Shooter in the Hospital. And that appeared in San Antonio Medicine. And there's a link to that through the DRGO website, and it's free. You can read it. But we talk about how hospital gun-free zones are immoral because it really allows the bad guy, when he decides he wants to kill a bunch of people, free reign.